Friends, I'm speaking to you from New Delhi. This is Sunday, October 19th, around 2 a.m. It's practically the eve of Diwali, which is a festival that's supposed to celebrate, to put it in the most colloquial terms, the victory of good over evil. It is also Sunday, um, Saturday afternoon in the United States, where, as we know, there is a nationwide protest taking place today called No Kings. And it's meant to be a demonstration of people's power, particularly against the pretensions of Donald Trump, who says, of course, that he is not a king, but is nevertheless prone to extremely authoritarian and dictatorial tendencies. Now, all of that is the backdrop, in a manner of speaking, to this lovely book that I want to talk about at this time. It's a book that I really stumbled upon very recently, just a little under 3 months ago when I arrived in Delhi. And it's a book simply called Barricade by Utpal Dutt, published by Seagull Books in Kolkata in 2021, translated by Ananda Lal. And what's unusual about the translation is the translation is not simply from Utpal Dutt's play, because Barricade is in fact a play. It's a translation not only from the play, but a translation based in part on production notes. That is, from actually watching performances of the play, because we have to remember that what is distinctive about the theater is that these plays are performed. And we can, of course, read plays, but there is a different understanding that we arrive at, as indeed the translator did when we watch a play. Now, I want to say something first about Utpal Dutt. Um, and at the same time, I also want to say something before I venture into a brief discussion of the book. I want to say something about what it means for a Bengali writer to have written a play which is set in Nazi Germany, the beginning of Nazi Germany in 1933, when Hitler assumed power. So partly, of course, one might say that the reason why I'm speaking about this book is because it speaks urgently to something in the present. But it's also interesting to reflect on the ecumenism of someone like Utpal Dutt. Uh, he may not have been alone in his times, although I think he was singular in many ways. And when I say he may not have been alone in his times, what I mean by that is that he was far from being the only person in India. That would never be the case, of course, but by that I mean he was far from being only part of a very small number of people who, let's say, had an interest in the affairs of the world. I think that Indians in the era of Nehru had a far greater interest in the world than they do at present. And their conception of the world was much more capacious. Right? The world simply didn't mean India and Pakistan and China and the United States. Right? So to the extent that anybody in this country thinks about the rest of the world, it usually means you're thinking about your enemies, Pakistan and China, or you're thinking about the United States, because if you come from a middle class family, that's where you think that you want to send your son and daughter for the university education, so forth and so on. And I'm well aware of the fact that there are people who are going to Australia and Canada and UK and so forth and so on. But nevertheless, I think it's undeniable that the United States hogs the imagination, not just of most middle class Indians, but most middle class people elsewhere in the world. There might be a certain disillusion creeping in now, given what's happening in the United States, But there is, and I've heard this from so many people, there is the expectation, as there is in the United States, that this is all going to be over in 3.5 years. Now we're not going to speak to that. I'm not going to speak to that point. At, but what I am speaking to is this whole point about the fact that we can think about the time of the 1950s, 1960s, when Utpal Dutt was growing up. He was born in 1929. This is when he becomes politically mature. In many ways, we can think of this as a time of global South solidarity. We can think of this, of course, as a time when the backdrop was the Cold War and people had to adopt certain kinds of ideological positions. Right? So I think there are many things to reflect on before we get to the play itself. And I want to now then go back to the question of who was Utpal Dutt. So he's born in Borishal, which is now in Bangladesh, in 1929. And from his teens, he became interested in theater. He was someone who acted in Shakespeare plays. Uh, and in fact, I think the first Shakespeare play he acted in was in 1949. By the late 1950s, he is, so we're talking about when he's now in his late, 20s, moving into his early 30s. He is becoming extremely active in political theater, and he's writing political plays and acting in them. And this continued into the 1960s. He's first arrested in 1966 because he had written a number of plays which were deeply offensive to the Congress Party. And Utpal Dutt's arrest was engineered. He didn't stay in jail very long. He comes out of jail after some months, joins the Naxalite movement. Later in that year, goes underground in 1967 and is arrested again in 1968. Many people in India also know him, particularly those who are outside Bengal, know him as a film actor. I remember a Hindi film which was a comedy called Golmaal, where Utpal Dutt played the principal role. And he also appeared in films directed by Satyajit Ray, including Jono Aronyo, The Middleman, and one of Satyajit Ray's later films, Agantuk, which appeared in the 1980s. I think Utpal Dutt's most famous role, as far as I am concerned, a role that I can never forget, is in a film called Bhuvan Shom. So Bhuvan, Shom, Shome. It's a film directed by Mrinal Sen in black and white, a film that's, I think, about 75, 80 minutes long, if I recall correctly. I've seen it a number of times. An extraordinary film. Utpal Dutt died in 1993. He was all of 63 or 64 years old. I think it's commonly acknowledged, and certainly I think if one reads Rustam Barucha's book on political theater in Bengal, that Utpal Dutt was, along with Badal Sarkar, probably the most important playwright of the second half of the 20th century in Bengal. Utpal Dutt was also a translator. He translated Shakespeare. He translated Bertolt Brecht. He was a careful student of revolutionary theater, of Brecht, of Stanislavski, and uh, 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 all of that, I think, comes into play when we're looking at his play called Barricade, right? So once again, this is the book, Barricade, right? First published, I think, in Bangla, if I'm not mistaken, I think sometime around the 1980s, perhaps. So um, let's talk a little bit, just a tad bit, about the political context of the late 1960s, 1970s. In 1971, Hemanto Basu, uh, he was 75 years old. He was a leader of the Forward Bloc, a longtime communist, and he was murdered in open daylight on a Calcutta street in February 1971. The general elections were due to be held in March. Um, the Congress blamed the communists um, for this. And so part of this play is, of course, about scapegoating, the scapegoating of communists, but you can think about it more generally, the phenomenon of scapegoating, which is what we're seeing in many countries in the world at this point in time, which is all the more reason why I think Barricade speaks to us at the present, because uh, whenever there is um, the rise of dictatorship, the rise of authoritarianism, scapegoating becomes even more prominent than it is in ordinary times. We know that traditionally in Europe, and this is related not just to political events, but to the spread of disease. So when the Black Death took place, bubonic plague, who was scapegoated? The Jews, of course, right? And the Jewish people have been typically scapegoated in Europe. And in the 20th century, it wasn't only the Jews who were scapegoated, it was the communists who were scapegoated, as they're being scapegoated in the United States today. I mean, how often in one day does one hear the phrase the radical left being used to describe people of the Democratic Party, many of whom are extraordinarily conservative, in fact, right? I mean, they're not as conservative as the Republicans, but they're all people, a vast majority of them who believe in the principles of the free market ideology. They're gun owning, they love hunting. Um, I mean, there's not much of a difference between the Democrats and the Republicans in many ways, but there's no question. And Trump has himself said very clearly that, that his favorite phrase when he's thinking about the Democrats is, this phrase, the radical left, which is what the Speaker of uh, the United States Congress, Mike Johnson, or a senator such as Ted Cruz will say that, these people are terrorists, right? So there's a scapegoating that is going on presently there. And we know that there are certain people who are being scapegoated in India constantly. Uh, so when we're thinking about this play Barricade, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't look at it as a work of literature. We shouldn't look at it as a masterful attempt by Utpal Dutt, right, who was writing several decades ago when he wrote this play to suggest the urgency of thinking about the Nazi takeover then. If he felt it was urgent then, imagine how much more urgent it is to think about it today. What's striking, of course, is that all of this is a testament to what Walter Benjamin once said when he said that, you know, people speak about a crisis. I hear that word constantly today, that we're in a crisis. And he said, if you're a thoughtful person, you're always in a crisis. When are you not in a crisis? Because humanity always seems to be at the brink. All right. Now, going back to Kolkata before we get to the play. So, 1971, Hemanto Basu in 1971 is murdered on the streets in Calcutta. The elections were to be held the next month. The CPM actually there was also a general legislative assembly election at the same time. The CPM had the largest share of the vote, uh, but a coalition led by the Congress actually would form the government, which didn't survive very long, collapsed in 1972, and then West Bengal went to the polls once again. Um, to have a new legislative assembly, and this is the context in which this play is set. Guru Utpal Dutt would himself recall, and here I want to quote. I'm quoting from page 6 of the book from the introduction. He says that in 1972, we all felt that we had to take the offensive. Then we staged Barricade. They were making a Reichstag fire trial out of the murder of Hemanthu Basu. For some of my listeners, I'm certain that many of the listeners are aware of what the Reichstag fire is, but for those of you who aren't, the Reichstag fire is a fire that was set in Germany by supposedly the communists, right? That was the pretext that was used by Hitler, the parliament being set, the Bundestag being set on fire, and he used that as a pretext to, of course, to shut down the communist movement, to literally eviscerate and wipe out the communists. He felt he now had the authority to do that, right? They were trying to put. So remember what Utpal Dutt said. They were making a Reichstag fire trial out of the murder of Hemanthu Basu. They were trying to put the guilt on the communists and hoping to win the elections that way. All right, that's the context for the play. So he obviously, Utpal Dutt, thought that, well, yes, this is a play that very much speaks to what is happening in Bengal. Now, the play is based in the play is basically about the Nazi takeover in 1933. It's based on a fictionalized chronicle, Unsere Straße, Our Street, by Jan Peterson, who lived from 1906 to 69. And the play also shows the communist resistance at Wallstrasse or Wall Street in Berlin. Um, Before one jumps to the conclusion that this is a play by a radical communist, okay, and an ardent defense of communism, and that I likewise am doing the same thing, before one jumps to the conclusion, it is worthwhile for the viewer to understand that when this play was first performed, okay, and in subsequent performances as well, Utpal Dutt was charged by his communist critics as not being sufficiently communist. He was, quote, a Babu communist. He was a counter-revolutionary, right? And in fact, the CPI, not the CPM, the Communist Party of India, the original party, not the Communist Party of India Marxist or CPM, in fact, obstructed its performances, as did the Congress often. All right. And I think I mentioned that the play was first published in I think the early 1980s. It was actually published in 1977 in Bangla, and then of course we now have this English translation. So this is a play in Bengali about people, which the translation is in English, but about people in who in the production are playing speaking Bengali, and it's about people in Germany in the 1930s. It's Utpal Dutt occasionally would use German phrases, which he did not translate into Bangla, and they have not been translated into English either. And by Ananda Lal, there are just a few phrases here and there. One reason why Utpal didn't do that was to partly, of course, try to confer some element of what we might call authenticity to the production. All right. So, um, uh, getting into the play now, there is a quotation that appears on page 21, with which I want to begin. And this is Uh, the footnote says that this quotation is translated from Dutt's Bengali, not from Peterson's original. So it's an interpolation by Dutt. All right. And this is what Peterson says in this interpolation. What is fascism? In what ways, step by step, do fascists overcast a country's skies like storm clouds? Can doctors, justices, housewives, priests, journalists, intellectuals of all kinds shut the doors of their homes and stay far from the tumult on the thoroughfares? Will fascism spare anyone? The experience of Nazi ascendancy in Germany says that in the end, everyone has to come and stand at the barricades unless it has become much too late. The play is a call to come and stand at the barricades, right? So it begins, this translation begins not with the formal play, it begins with a prologue that um, uh, introduces. This is what Shakespeare. Excuse me. This is what Kalidas did in his plays as well. And so there's a conversation that takes place between a sutradar, that is a storyteller. In this case, the sutradar is also identified as a laborer, and um, another laborer. And it opens with the sutradar singing some songs in a foreign language, and the other laborer says, "Why are you singing these songs in a foreign language? What is this song that you're singing?" And he says, "It's a Red Army song. It's a Russian laborer song. It's a revolutionary song." And the laborer says, "Why these foreign songs in Calcutta? Right? We have enough of our labor songs and revolutionary songs. We have the songs of somebody like Nazrul, for example. He's referring to Qazi Nazrul Islam, right? We have native revolutionary songs." And the Sutradar says, "But why shouldn't I sing Red Army songs? What's native or foreign about revolutionary songs? Do you reject Europeans in revolutionary matters? I consider myself Bengali only if I can present the whole world in Kolkata's courtyard. What's in your hand?" Right? And then he's referring to the implement that this person has. The implement actually happens to be foreign. We won't need to get into all of that. The point simply this is, for the revolutionary, there are no borders. And of course, you could say that this was standard communist fare, of course, right? I mean, so in some ways, this play is not only about um, you know, learning from the experience of other countries. It's about communist internationalism, if I can use that phrase, right? Not international communism, but in communist internationalism. That's everything that the Sutradhar says here. That there's nothing really revolutionary to for nothing foreign to a revolutionary like me. Marx is just as much Bengali to me, or Mao, or Che Guevara, as the Naxalites, for example, right? But as I said, this is very much par for the course for someone who believes in this kind of communist internationalism, right? So now the formal play is um, uh, about 100 pages in length. And the plot there is very simple. It'll just take a few minutes to really describe what the play is about, and I'll conclude my discussion with that. So the play really begins by establishing the war that is taking place between the Nazis and the communists on the streets of Berlin, right? Early 1930s until the takeover by Hitler, of course, in 1933. And it begins with a character called Otto Berkholz, who's a reporter for a newspaper called the Freie Zeitung. Okay. And there's a kind of a monologue where Otto describes how Hitler came to power, that the Nazis had very little electoral votes in 1930, 1931, 32, but things were engineered in their favor. And finally, of course, then there's the Reichstag fire, and then Hitler is eventually going to be elected a chancellor. And then the main catalyst for everything that happens in the play is the murder of a man called Joseph Zauritz. In real life, he was actually a policeman. In the play, he is represented as a kind of a popular leader who's killed. And we are introduced then to the newspaper owner, the newspaper for which Otto Berkholz works, Heinrich Lahn, who says that it is quite evident that he was actually killed by the communists, right? He says that the Nazis have many faults, but the communists are much worse. They are a manifest curse. All right. And so he's instructing Otto, Land is instructing his reporter, Otto Berkholz, that you must write an account of the widow and the tears she's had to shed, and how the communists are undoubtedly behind the murder of her husband, and how young men are being actually spoiled, contaminated, polluted, exploited by the communists, right? Uh, the communists have made killings, riots, beheadings so easy that today men swallow 10 or 12 daily killings like their morning coffee. The racist sense of morals and values is crumbling, right? See, it's the same language that you hear now, right? I mean, you hear it in the United States, you hear it in India, you hear it in so many countries, you hear it in Turkey. Um, our race values, our moral fiber, all of this is breaking down, right? Okay. The values of life are crumbling down like an insolvent bank. No incident can be more unfeeling than this. Cracks show up at the foundation of civilization. The Nazis have many faults, but the communists are a manifest curse. Nothing has been established yet, but that is that there's been no inquiry, but the newspaper owner, the editor, chief editor, is quite certain it's the communists who are behind this. And then the scene shifts to a public square where a Nazi leader by the name of Johann Lippert denounces Zauritz's murder, describes him as a people's, people's man, a populist leader, and he says that one of the problems with these communists is, these goons, is that they claim to be German, they're born here, but their country really is the Soviet Union, right? They have no loyalty, they have no patriotism whatsoever, right? And this sets the tone for what's going to happen, because essentially what the play will then establish is how people from different walks of life, right, are cajoled, persuaded into abandoning the moral values that they held, and how they all succumb to Nazism, right? How it swallows up everyone, right? So there are a number of these monologues. I mean, you could say that that's part of the problem with a play like this, because certainly there are critiques that can be made, and one of the critiques has to do with a certain kind of didacticism. I think particularly when you're looking at a play which is about the clash between communism and Nazism, and the author is someone who was deeply committed in many ways to principles of equality, which he thought communism, at least in its ideal form, promoted. And there's no question that we can also think of Utpal Dutt not simply as a communist, but someone who belonged to the humanist tradition. That nothing, to use that cliched phrase, that if for a humanist like him, nothing human is really alien to him. So, the sorrows of people in other parts of the world become his sorrows. Um, the political oppression taking place somewhere else becomes the political oppression that you have to think about wherever you are, no matter how comfortable you are, right? So there is a kind of didacticism, but what's also interesting is that the didacticism is subtle in a way because it alerts us to certain aspects of fascism. And one of the things that people don't properly understand, and this play I think makes it amply clear, is that there's an intricate relationship between fascism and the entire superstructure of law. That the fascists often claim to abide by the law. They say that we are actually following the law. I mean, remember that everything that is happening in the United States, for example, the raids on immigrants, Trump's attempts to bring in, the National Guard into American cities, possibly even use the Insurrection Act, which goes back to 1808. What he and what the Attorney General in the United States are saying is we're following the law. We're actually trying to remove lawlessness, right? And so this is, that portion that I was describing as didactic. What Utpal Dutt is doing is by putting these words in the mouth of the Nazi leader, he's making it amply clear that one of the ways in which the Nazis rose to power was to suggest that we are actually rising to power on the back of law itself. This is what the character says, the Nazi character. The National Socialist Party doesn't believe in all that oppression. Contrasting this with what's happening in the Soviet Union. Our leader, Adolf Hitler, will confront the communists in independent and unobstructed elections next 5 March. We won't tolerate the Communist Party's slightest interference in democratic rights. This is a Nazi leader saying it. This isn't Russia. We won't allow Stalin's repressive methods here. We'll build socialism on a different path, the path of peace and order, and so forth and so on. All right. So this is the intervention by the Nazi leader who's saying that, well, law is really central to what we do. It's part of our sensibility. All right. Now, who are the other characters? So there's the widow of Zauritz. We never meet, of course, Zauritz because it's his murder that becomes the catalyst for everything that happens. We meet her adopted son. His name is Paul Schall or Schall. He's a communist worker. She herself is that is his mother, and the widow of Joseph Zauritz is persuaded that Paul may have had a hand in the killing of uh, his own father, his adoptive father, because he's a communist, right? So at this point, she has also bought into the entire story that it's a communist who are really responsible for killing her husband. And then she says, "Well, won't you?" And so there's a dialogue that takes place between them, and he of course denies it. So then she says, "Well, weren't you involved in violence?" And he says, "Yes, yes, yes, I have been involved in violence, but not in killing my own father." And then as a true communist, he says that, well, violence can be a form of cleansing, and sometimes it's important. Class struggle is essential to trying to secure justice, and class struggle is war by other means. All right, so this is what he says to his adopted mother. Right? There's no purity detached from the earth's conflicts. We don't see life separately from class struggle. One war continues. In this war, when the owner has a laborer killed, it's a crime. But when the laborer murders the owner's pet goon as a reply to 300 years of exploitation, it's self defense, it's justice. A bigger question than whether life's sacred or not is who's taking whose life. And so, of course, his mother becomes extremely upset. Well, just to move rapidly towards the conclusion, a judicial inquiry is held. It's held by a man called Voss, Justice Voss. He appears to be a man who's uh, rather even-handed. And in fact, it seems that he's going to pass down a sentence uh, or pass down an initial verdict absolving the communists, particularly a man called Robert Hutig, who is a character of the murder, okay, of Zauritz, right? But then Justice Voss himself is in fact actually killed, all right? So what's going to happen towards the end is so the newspaper owner is essentially going to say to the reporter Otto that, look, now you have to start manufacturing the news. Okay, you're going to have to essentially write that the communists have become a nuisance. They were doubtless implicated in this killing. They have created mayhem, right? So forth and so on. And this is where the play then moves to an end, where finally some people decide to go to the barricades. Barricade, right? They decide to go to barricades, meaning some people say that we have to stand up for the truth, right? And there's some extraordinary sort of lines there. One of the persons, because before we come to that end, there is a scene there where it seems that the state's ability to be able to set the narrative is so powerful that no one is willing to resist. No one wants to take the chance. So the reporter himself says that, well, look, I mean, I can't really, report on this anymore. I've got other things to do. He wants to be absolved of any kind of responsibility of reporting on this because, he's that inquisitive reporter who's been trying to arrive at the truth. All right. And we see that other witnesses will gradually withdraw, but then things turn around, right? That a few people decide that they're going to go to the barricade, right? And among them is the doctor himself. So I just want to conclude by going to the last couple of pages of this play. The widow Ingeborg, the widow of uh, 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 Joseph Zauritz, the uh, the populist leader whose murder becomes the catalyst for everything, right? So his widow, the one who had accused her adopted son of being implicated in the murder of his father, she has gradually come around to a different view. All right, she's come around to a different view because of the political events that have taken place. So that's partly what constitutes the middle portion of this play, and so she wants to now become a witness against against the state as she goes to the barricades, right? And this is here. I want to just quote from that. She says, "I'm not a communist. I don't know anything except Jesus. So I used to say at the beginning, they're slaying a few communists. What's it to us? Now I understand. The communists die first, then the others' turns come one by one. Then one day I see the entire country's a jailhouse." All right? And the Dr. Struble, also joins the barricades. And why does he do so? Because he says, an educated man's self reproach. What else? If I have to survive by carrying out their commands, that is, the commands of the Nazis, where's my respect for reading Schopenhauer? Right? He's the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and Karl Marx. They're burning books. Understand? Right? An educated man's self reproach. Right? What a wonderful phrase. And so With this, I could say that the book is an invitation to everyone to join the barricades.